Hello and welcome to the Wisepreneurs podcast. My name is Nigel Rawlins and I work with a range of women who are professionals in their field. They're often 50 to 60 years old who want to start their own business. In this podcast, I'll be interviewing a range of guests who will be able to tell you how they've done it themselves, and others who will give you hints and ideas and tips and maybe the confidence you need to go out and start your own business. In this episode of the Wisepreneurs podcast, I speak with Jon Younger, an energetic, knowledgeable and prolific 70-year-old writer for Forbes magazine. Jon writes extensively on Agile Talent, the future of work and the freelance revolution, demonstrating his insight into these emerging trends. He has a solid human resources management background, indicating a deep understanding of people, management and business operations. He's an advisor to a local company in Melbourne called MASH, which curates globally awarded creatives to work on brand challenges across the world, suggesting an international footprint and the ability to influence businesses globally. The discussion goes deep into the topic of freelancing, shedding light on its practical aspects and how it's changing the world of work. We also discuss the importance of staying up to date with current work trends and technology. If you want to know anything about freelancing anywhere in the world, Jon is the man. I enjoyed our discussion and I hope you do too. Welcome, Jon, to the Wisepreneurs podcast. It's fantastic to be able to speak to you because I've been reading your Forbes articles about freelancing and I've suddenly realized the whole world's not as what I thought it was. And this fits into the future of work stuff that I've been looking at for more than 20 years now. So a couple of things I noticed about you is it mentions that you are interested in Agile Talent, the future of work. You're a writer at Forbes on the freelance revolution, and you're an advisor to a company in Melbourne called MASH. Tell me something about those things.
Let me start with my backstory, just a little bit of a backstory. I was a fairly traditional human resources oriented management consultant. I had started with the colleagues, 2 firms. One of them had grown through, forgot what they call it, a roll up of other firms and it become a public company. And the other one was doing very nicely. And I was 62 and I was tired. But I did a little bit of additional consulting. And the additional consulting I did was for a very large pharmaceutical distributor called McKesson. McKesson's a very good company. I think it's an ethical company. Got swept up in some of the crap around fentanyl and opioids, and it did some bad things. But I don't think it was a badly managed or badly intended company. But they had asked me to take a look at their human resources organization and give them some advice and counsel. And I'd done that for many large companies. And my conversation with them after about a month of talking to a bunch of people and doing some surveys was, a third of your workforce doesn't actually work for you. They're contractors, they're freelancers, they're part-timers, just a whole bunch of different categories. And you guys seem to be managing it as if everybody's a traditional full-time employee, and they're not. And that is something that you might want to consider as you continue to grow. Maybe the issue isn't only the skills of an employee or the difficulty or ease with which you hire them. Maybe there's a whole other category called the blended flexible workforce that kind of changes everything. Well, they got excited about that. I got excited about that. We started to do more research. It led to a book called Agile Talent. In fact, my initial title was The Talent Cloud, but the editor at Harvard said, no, Agile Talent's the thing. And it's a nice one. It's a nice one. And that led to Forbes articles and just a whole lot of writing. And Nigel, I'm an old guy, and I used to be the youngest guy in the room. You know, that old expression. I'm now the oldest guy in the room, probably double the next guy, sometimes triple. And what a delight it is to work with young people who are creating the businesses of tomorrow, some small, some large, and some in between, and are eager to benefit by what old timers like you and I have to offer, but not feeling bound to follow what our advice might be. They're making their own way, but they're interested in what we have to say. And I will write about that population from here to forever. What a pleasure and an honor to do that. So that's kind of my story. I'll tell you the MASH part, which is an awful lot of fun. I think I got an email out of nowhere from Tash Menon, who's the founder of MASH. I just fell in love. I mean, immediately with all three of those amazing women who were leading that firm, Amy and Sarah and Tash. It has grown extraordinarily and beautifully. And I will tell you that one of the things that they've done that I think has led them in good stead, and I'd be interested in your view. We didn't know about VCs and private equity in the 70s and 80s when I was building the businesses that helped me and my family and hired a whole bunch of other people. We just didn't know about that stuff. And so we never asked to raise money. We just kind of bootstrapped it. Bootstrapping is a very helpful thing because you get to know the business in detail. There are an awful lot of startups that are not in the business of making money. They're in the business of spending funding.
Mm.
And that seems to me a little nutty. It seems a little crazy. Tash and Amy and Sarah and they have a wonderful financial advisor, Shane, sort of sat down and virtually and helped those wonderful leaders to understand that by bootstrapping their way to sort of the first level of profitability, they would build a very strong base to grow quite quickly. And they have.
Mm.
And they're ringing the bell, not only in Australia, but also in Southeast Asia, in Europe, and even in the US with some of the big companies. Forgive me for that advertising, but
No,
I'm
it's
a
good.
big fan of MASH.
The other thing is it women?
They certainly bring a secret sauce. There's an extraordinary dimension among those women. I don't know if it's women in general. And I always grew up in a household with boys, and so it's sort of hard for me to know. But they have a wonderful and rare ability to both defer to one another, and at the same time, they know how to resolve thick and difficult issues without leaving scars.
Mm.
Men don't know how to do that in general, is my experience. There's always blood on the floor somewhere.
Yeah.
But these three women, at least, Nigel, now, is that general or is that specific to women in Melbourne?
No, I think that's women. I have worked with men, but I have a preference for working with women because they seem to get the work done and they're really good with relationships and they tend to work well with me. And I'm very respectful of women and most of them are smarter than me, I can tell you. And that's why I love working with them. Things get done. And some of the women I've worked with more than 6-7 years now. And, they appreciate what I can do and I appreciate their intelligence and I don't tell them what to do. I think what you're seeing there is how women can work well as a team and get stuff done.
I think you're absolutely right. In tennis, I'm told, I'm not a great tennis player, but I'm told that in tennis, the deal is to always play with somebody a little better than you. Not a lot better than you because then you're creamed. And not the same or worse because it's not as challenging. I think that they have, at least these three women have the rare ability to keep challenging one another, to be a little more creative, be a little more innovative, to take more responsible risk around their business, to reach a little bit more than others might. So, I think it's possibly the partnership as well as the unique partnership as well as the unique women.
Yes, that sounds like it. Well, let's talk a little bit about the freelance revolution.
Sure.
So you saw it in the pharmaceutical company. And so in America, I think you do have more contractors and more freelancers, where I think in Australia, we've generally had full-time positions or very rarely part-time or shared. So I don't know how big freelancing has become in Australia. I've been using Upwork now for 14 years in Australia. I only checked the other day when they sent me a thing of 14 years. That's because I outsource and keep myself as a one-person business.
So remember, you're the home of the largest freelance marketplace in the world, which is freelancer.com. And Matt Barry, who's a Sydney boy, and who's got a wonderful story to tell. And I hope you'll invite him onto your show.
Yeah.
Has built an organization that is just under Saudi Arabia in population. There are 58 million folks on the freelancer.com platform, and they are fairly well represented all over the world. It's quite extraordinary. In addition to that, you sort of have three levels in Australia, as in many developed and important economies, right? You've got the worldwide, the global players are all there. Then you've got really strong regional leaders. So an example of a regional leader would be, I think there's a very large organization called UDO in Australia that's doing quite well. I think you would find Expert 360 as a business platform. And then you have all of these wonderful, wonderful startups like MASH that are just coming along and going pretty quickly. Matt tells a very interesting story. If you ever choose to invite him on your show, he tells the story of being a graduate student at Stanford and taking the class in new business innovation or something like that, along with the guys that created PayPal, the guys that created some other stuff. And he said, turns out that class of 30 kids created $500 billion worth of corporate value. Wow. I mean, what can you say other than, wow, what a class that must have been. He's a delightful fellow, and he's doing some good in the world. He's creating what all of these platforms do because of the tech that's available is they allow me to work from anywhere and deliver anywhere. And not all professions can do that. But, as an example of this, I'm working with a group, part of my payback for having been fortunate in business. I ended up being part of 2 IPOs, and it's put bread on the table and a roof over our head. And one of my areas of payback is by helping regional freelance communities get together. So we did that in Spain. We did that in the UK. We're going to be doing that in Germany, something in the Mideast this year. I'm also working with a group of platforms from Latin America. And freelancer.com, which is also operating in Latin America, has been fabulous in helping us do the planning around this summit. And I think they'll end up helping us a little bit around the funding of this summit. So think about it. You've got not only a group of people from Brazil to Chile and Argentina and Uruguay and Colombia working together, but they're working together with somebody that's supporting them from freelancer.com in Australia. That's the nature of how this stuff is all coming together. It's such a wonderful thing. You guys are a leader in an awful lot of aspects of freelancing because you've got a strong, educated, globally oriented population.
And way away from everywhere. It's like 30 hours to get to Europe.
Well, it's an island, that's for sure.
Yeah, we're a long way away. So freelancing has obviously become a revolution. So obviously COVID forced that a lot more. So the other thing too is not everyone can work from home or work like that. So you have to have some sort of expertise and know-how and obviously the technology. So let's talk a little bit about that. Who can benefit from being a freelancer?
It's amazing the range. So one way to think about this is when people like Upwork, and I know you've worked with Upwork for some time, when they say 68 or 69 or whatever percentage of freelancers are happy making as much money as they used to, et cetera, freelancing is lumpy. So that's the first thing to remember. What's in demand goes up and down and moves around. Times of fullness, economic fullness, marketing and advertising and that kind of stuff becomes very popular, and marketing people can do extremely well. In times of recession, people are cutting advertising and marketing budgets, as you know, as a marketing industry. And so it gets a little tougher. You've really got to, if you're thinking about being a freelancer, one of the things to do is to ask yourself, how do I make sure I'm in demand? I believe that one of the things that happened as a result of the pandemic here in the US is that people started to enjoy baking and cooking. Doesn't mean everybody's going to end up being a professional chef or a professional baker. And I make a pretty good cornbread, but I don't think I can make a living making my cornbread. Some people might. So that's the first thing. Nigel, it's figuring out, do you have what's in demand, and is it going to be in demand long enough for you to make a career of it, and in an industry that's robust enough, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is just about everybody says, start being a side gigger, start building it up. Don't give up your full-time job, or don't drop your other jobs to specialize in one thing until you think you know how to do it and think there's really a shot. And the third thing is connect up with others. One of the things I laugh about is that I'm an introvert, so I like Zoom. I get to meet people all over the world, but I get to be a little bit of a recluse. Not much, but a little bit. Well, it's very different for other people in other kinds of ways. So you've got to really ask yourself, is this the right way for me to deliver my life as well as my work? For me, working from home, and I know from you working from home, and I know from the description and little I see, it's a beautiful place to work. So, gee whiz, that makes sense. It turns out that there are three things that lead people to hesitate when they're interested in freelancing. And I wonder if this agrees with you. First is they're afraid of income volatility, too much up and down. Second is they are reluctant to lose some of their attractive benefits. Nigel, neither you nor I gets a paid vacation.
No.
Vacation is right out of our pocket, right? I mean, that's just the way that it is. It's not the same thing in an awful lot of organizations. So the third is a fear of loneliness, a fear that you're not only working remotely, but you're experiencing a level of remoteness that is unattractive to you. And one of the things that we say to people is, you don't have to be doing this alone. I mean, there are other folks, there are other meetups, there are other organizations that you can create and be around folks. Not only be around folks all the time, but even more importantly, it's tough to keep filling the bucket, if I may say so, around work. And so working with other people to fill up a common bucket is a whole lot easier. And normally what that's turned into is a marketplace. But it doesn't have to be a market. You don't have to work for Expert 360 or for MASH or any of the others. You can create your own. And most freelancers, by the way, do create their own. But always better to hunt in packs, if I may call it that. We have some data that's really interesting. And may I share with you?
Yeah, sure. That's great.
So one of the things that we did on this global survey of freelancing is we asked people a bunch of questions about how they feel about freelancing. We got about 2,000 people from all over the world, including Australia. And one of the things that we did was to take a look at it by their experience level. So I'm going to give you an overall statement, and then I'm going to give you some of the data for very new freelancers. Freelancers see their strengths as flexible and adaptable. They've got grit, they're resilient. They are absolutely committed to meeting commitments. They accept responsibility and accountability, and they work well with people all over the place. And they have strong ethics. This is how people describe their strengths for freelancers. Here's what they say are their weak sides. And I wonder if this is true for you. It's true for me. Good networker. I'm not so good. Effective planner. Not so good. Speaks other languages. Definitely not so good.
No.
Makes business contacts. Well, I'm not so good at that. At persuasive and sensitive to how others perceive me. I think I'm sensitive to how others perceive me, but I don't think that I'm very good at marketing. So the message here from the data that I just read you is we're the people that you want to work with, but we're not good at convincing you to hire us. And that's why people end up banding together into marketplaces. It's a way to make that happen. Now, I'm going to read you one other thing, and that is, here's what newbies say about their freelance experience. They are most critical with respect to work deliverables, milestones, and timelines being fair and reasonable. They feel as though they're pushed. That this client requires top quality work from freelancers. They feel like they're more demanded by their clients. My client manager knows how to work well with freelancers. New ones once said, no, not as well as the folks that are more experienced. I have access to the information I need. Nope, not as good. The client team members are normally friendly and helpful when I have a question or need. Not as good. Treated fairly and with respect in my dealings with this client company. Not as good. I am paid fairly for my work for this company. Not as good. So we've got a pretty interesting case, newbie challenge. I don't know what else you want to call it. And one of the things that we're going to have to do as an awful lot of people join the ranks of the freelancing world is we're going to have to help them to do a better job through education. We're going to have to help them through mentoring and coaching. We're talking more and more about two concepts of a philosophy that I hope will stick. One is from a marketplace perspective. How do you make sure that you're a freelancer first kind of organization, that you really are prioritizing the success of your freelancers? And we've actually got a group of 15 CEOs from around the world who are working together, sharing each other's best practices to identify how to be freelancer first. Some of them quite large, some of them smaller and newer. The second thing is we got to help them to start out strong. The first year is tough. I don't know if you remember your first year as an independent.
Oh, it was shocking. Well, I don't think people realize how long it actually does take. It's not 1 year either, unless if you've got what they call a rare and valuable skill. It can take 10 years. And
Yes.
that's the scary thing. You will not make as much money unless, of course, you've got those high value skills.
And what you just said is very important because one of the things that people have got to figure out in their first year is, what is my offer? What makes me in demand? What makes me attractive to companies? Not only to be hired at all, but to be hired for the kind of work that I want to do and the kinds of places that I want to work there. You can, I'm 71, as you know, you're a younger man.
And 66.
Yeah. And one of the things about my professional career is that I had the good fortune to be born at a time when there was just so much more demand than supply. My marketing strategy, excuse me, because I'm talking to a marketer, my marketing strategy was to answer the phone. And I went about filling the pipeline by writing books and writing articles and giving speeches. It's a different world now. In our last year as a consulting firm, before that one was rolled up, we were one of the top 100 consulting firms in the US. Nigel, I don't think we'd be in the top 1,000 in terms of volume at this point. I mean, it was just, that's the scale difference. In 45 years, I've had the privilege of sort of working around this.
Well, let's just talk a little bit about freelancing. I think most of us, when we think about freelancing, are thinking about people who do coding and stuff like that. But I think it's wider than that, because I work with, one of the people I work with is a product safety specialist who spent 30 years in the government, but understands all the regulations and laws around product safety. But that's a teeny tiny niche. But she gets court cases and advisories and stuff like that. But what are some of the because I think when people are listening to this, they're thinking, oh, freelancing, it's more than just coding and experts like that.
It's funny. The first freelancers in history were the engineers and the architects working in Rome building the Pantheon. And we are misled by the thought that somehow they're a different race. Think of freelancers as independent professionals offering their skills to businesses for a reasonable price. There are lots of variations. So let's first go through the variations. First is you can be a side gigger, which means you have a full-time job, but you're moonlighting on the side of the weekends, and you might do many different things. A second would be you have 3 or 4 organizations. You said you have 14 clients, and that's your job. You are the independent business owner of a services organization servicing 14 clients. You could also be doing that part-time and doing something else, or doing that majorly, and then doing a part-time thing on the other side. And then there are some folks that go full-time. In the world, the percentage of people who are full-time freelancers is somewhere around a third. That's a big jump from just a few years ago. What's important about that is that you and I, as independent business operators, would have access to small businesses and perhaps medium businesses as side giggers. But a big company doesn't want to hire a side gigger to do stuff. A big company wants the security of knowing that person is available to them and they're not conflicted in terms of knowledge or expertise or whatever that is. Now, once you get into that, Nigel, anybody's a freelancer. Singapore Air pilots were freelancers. They were not full-time employees. They were independent pilots who worked for a number of airlines and then signed a long-term contract for Singapore Air. There are surgeons that are freelancers. There are musicians. There's an organization in New York called the Emergency Musicians Organization, which supplies musicians to bands in an emergency. There is a very large and very successful platform in the UK and in France, yoga teachers and masseurs and masseuses. And in 2021, that organization gave 250,000 massages to people in France. Now, explain to me, Nigel, who in heaven's name would want to get a massage in the middle of the pandemic? But God bless, there were apparently 250,000 of them. So in every area there is. Now, you got to take a look at, if you're thinking about this stuff, there's some trade-offs. I'll give you one. We have many management consultants in the world, and many of them have gone to fine schools, and many of them are really smart, and many of them do very interesting work and have always felt like successful people. And they leave their firms, whether it's a McKinsey or a Bain or a BCG or any number of other firms, and they become freelancers, and they expect all of the benefits, psychological and financial benefits that they enjoyed at McKinsey and doesn't have. And they're no longer flying first class, and they're no longer staying at 5-star hotels, and they're no longer being greeted and feted when they walk into the organization. And they no longer need to be wearing custom suits because they're mostly working in sweatshirts around their house. So part of what's happened is that there's been this transformation of work as the technology has allowed almost anybody to be contracted with through this mechanism called the marketplace. That doesn't mean they may do all of their work that way. An awful lot of freelancers in the EU, for example, are still expected to go into the office 1 or 2 days a week. But the capacity now is so changed in terms of the ability of people to be untethered in the location in which they're working. And what that means, Nigel, is that we have opened the doors to economic opportunity for people that were stuck as an accident to being born in the wrong place.
Yeah, no, gotcha.
And you and I both know that half of the benefit that I've enjoyed is that I just happened to be born in the right place by the right parents.
I think our generation is very different to the new one. I think it's a bit more precarious for the younger ones today, but they don't seem to be overly worried about it.
No. And I'll tell you, it's absolutely true. I used to compete with an awful lot of people, but my kids have been competing with everybody all over the world. I mean, there's just no end.
That's the issue. So a couple of things then. The platforms for freelancers help with the marketing and the selling, because that's one of the big issues that I had to learn is what is marketing and, how do you sell and how do you actually get that work and then how do you get paid? And so what I'm hearing about is that a lot of these platforms are providing a service to the freelancer to be able to do all that and get the gig.
Yes and no. And let me give you both sides of it. Let me digress for just 1 second. You know the old stuff in Economics 101. You've got 2 hot dog stands and a stretch of beach. You put the 2 hot dog stands together in the middle of the beach, or do you leave them at different ends? First year economics students always walk into the classroom thinking you leave them at different ends because you're avoiding competition. And then they understand by the end that it's not about avoiding competition. It's about building the market, which is what happens when you bring them together. 1 and 1 equals 3. That's the premise of a marketplace. The premise of a marketplace is that it'll connect buyers and sellers. And because it's a marketplace, it'll attract more opportunity than you could get on your own. And that's the starting point. Now, how good is it as a work producing mechanism? And the answer is not so hot. And here's why. The average is somewhere about 10 to 20% of people on a platform get any kind of a work, not 10 Australian dollars, not 10 million. What we also know is that just like anything else, it's 80-20, that it's a smaller group of folks. And here's what that smaller group has learned. They've learned that being in a marketplace is good for some things, but it's not assurance that you'll get work. Yes. That at the end of the day, Nigel, you and I run bodegas at the corner of Lafayette and Carlton in Brooklyn. And just like the bodega, just like the deli, you gotta market it, you gotta sell it, you've got to build relations, you've got to build your network, you've got to have something powerful to sell, you've got to sell it everywhere you possibly can, et cetera, et cetera. And you know that stuff. I'm just obviously converted. But I think that an awful lot of first years don't feel confident or comfortable doing that. They hope that joining a marketplace will solve it, and it doesn't.
Right.
And what needs to be put in place is an educational process that teaches these guys that just because you're in the yellow pages doesn't guarantee your business. All it does guarantee that in this one spot, you're part of something.
They do have to learn how to market themselves then. And I think you've even mentioned they've got to be clear about what is it that their talent is that they're selling. So you're right. I think that's the other issue too, is having a talent and maybe getting some work, but then keeping that talent, keeping that expertise relevant. So this is not just, hey, I've got to open my shop and off I go. You've got to keep relevant, keep learning.
No, I love that. And let me riff off it for just 1 second. I used to teach classes both at universities and for client companies in HR transformation, sort of HR competencies. And we had written a bunch of books. I know that in the HR world of Australia, HRI, my former firm, RBL.net, did an awful lot of work with that. And Dave Ulrich, one of our partners, did an awful lot of work. You know, it was very interesting. In the last couple of years that I was actively teaching HR, way back in sort of the 2012, 2013, one of the questions I'd have for these folks who were well-paid, managerial or executive level HR folks, I'd say, how much time do you spend reading? And they go, well, reading what? And it's anything. What? It doesn't matter. Anything. And the average was 1 hour a week, other than read material that they had to read for work. But even including newspapers, even including The Economist, even including sort of checking websites, by their estimation, it was an hour, maybe an hour and a half. And that was that's terrifying. And so part of the stuff in terms of making sure you're future-proofing your skill set is you've got to look at it from the outside in. You've got to look at it not from a guy or a lady or an individual that has good intention and skills, and why won't you hire me? But instead, what is it about you that I would want to hire you instead of the other people I could? Remember, this is not a judgment of you as an individual. This is a choice. It's a preference. You got to figure out how to put yourself on top, which means you've got to know what it is that they're like, what it is that they need, what it is that they're looking for, what it is that they're trying to do in their own organization that would lead you to be value added. I mean, it's a lot of homework to being a successful freelancer. The flip side of that, Nigel, is I've got choice. I've got three things. I've got autonomy, I've got agency, I've got choice. I can make my own decisions about where I work and where I don't. And I get to affiliate with whom I want to affiliate. And I think that's a trade that's worth it for me.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the benefits of older entrepreneurs, business owners. As I said, most of the people I work with are 60. So most of them already own their own homes. Some of them are retired, but they've still got a skill and they still want to give back. So they have some real choices. They want to go on holiday. They don't want to work every day. They don't want to start early. Sometimes, 10 o'clock's a good time to start. And yes, they do have time to read. and like you, I think you're a granddad. They
I
might,
am.
they might have their own children, elderly parents, so they've got a life already.
We found that 20% of the freelancers in our survey were, I think, 55 and above in age. And they tended to have 5 to 10 years of experience freelancing. So these were not young, inexperienced professionals. These were people that, for the most part, had had a successful career, but for any number of reasons were reluctant to leave that profession entirely.
Yeah.
Not sure what your approach is. I tend to reinvent myself every 6 or 7 years. I see myself as a series of projects, and I hope I'm getting better, not worse. But the last project before this, for a bunch of time, I was building a company. And then before that, I had the experience of being a senior vice president and the head of HR for a big bank. And then before that, something else. I have a personal need to stay fresh.
Yes.
But I have no idea. I'm coming on 6 years again, and I have no idea what the next one is. All I know is that I don't have the time to do the Japanese bonsai trees. I just won't be able to finish that one.
And I think that's the benefit of age too, is that we have a different perspective. And it's, like me, I don't want to work all the time anymore, but I do want to do interesting things and be helpful. I mean, I can see that you're being incredibly helpful to the world at the moment.
For me, writing is a good thing because it just keeps my brain in.
Yeah, but I love your writing. I think it's fantastic. So I will be spreading that around for people to read. Okay, well, some of the things I was going to go through is the problems of being a freelancer. We talked about inexperience, the issue of clients being pushy and things like that. I guess the other issue is pricing, being able to ask for what they think they're worth. Often that's really hard to find a price. So most of them, I would assume, are underpricing or working for nothing.
It's an interesting thing. I can give you some data around some of that stuff, which is fun. One is about half of the freelancers in a UK study by freelancerclub.net, which is a really great platform for photographers, videographers, and other independent professionals. And Matt Dowley would be another great guest for you. Matt's focus has been on companies taking advantage of freelancers by asking for free work. And about 59%, I think, from the data that I went through in an article, have in one way or another offered free work. And just everybody hasn't felt very good about it. It's the challenge for all of us in freelancing is to understand that our time has value. And it's our choice to give it away. It should not be asked for. It should be offered. I would say to you that over time, the hardest thing, maybe not the hardest thing, but let me give you 2 or 3 things that I think are toughest for seasoned and more experienced freelancers. One is understanding when the half-life of your knowledge is gone and you're really not up to snuff. I know that my time is limited in freelancing because I can't keep up with the tech. I can't. I was born at the wrong time with the wrong wiring. And so my limitation is really understanding some of the stuff. Because I haven't understood it terribly well, because I'm not that interested in the financial part, I focused on the kind of the ethnography, the anthropology of it all. But, my half-life, my knowledge is finite. I'm a product of when I learned, and I still listen to the Beatles. And so I need to know as a seasoned guy when I need to shift. I need to either learn new skills or change my area or slow down. And I've got lots of options around that, but I've got to be proactive in that. I've got to be the guy that leaves on the high to get to the next hill. And that's the message. You don't have to leave at a high to just go back to the valley. You may have another hill. Second thing I would say for more seasoned folks is surround yourself with young people. Just do it. I mean, I get such joy out of working with these amazing, I'll give you, there's a fellow named Albert Aziz Clausen. Albert is the founder of underpin.com. I'm trying to remember whether Albert is 26 or 27. He is a charismatic fella. He is brilliant, and he's extraordinarily courageous. He's got 170,000 university students all of those kids available basic education around freelancing in order to make some extra money and eventually build the freelance community and continue to build the freelance community in the UK. In addition, he's created something called the Association for the Future of Work. This is a 26, 27-year-old person. At 27, I think I was just finishing my degree and terrified of going out in the world. The third thing, so first is know when you've got to pivot. Second is work with young people because that's your best way of staying relevant. And the third is, this is business. Get your ego out of it. I'll give you an example, Nigel. I charged at the best time as much as $12,000 a day as a consultant. That's insane. I mean, I don't even know how to make sense of that. And I would get it 200 days a year. I mean, that's pretty good. I think I now make, I don't know, a quarter of that, maybe a fifth. I'm having the time of my life.
Yes. So the stress is not there. Yeah.
Well, the stress is not there. And I have a new set of relative values. So if I were upset that I wasn't making the money that I made when I was on top, I'd be driving myself crazy. Instead of understanding things change. And so what creates value for me and the value that I create has changed as a result. I'm not worth $12,000 a day. I was, but no more. And that's okay because I'm doing stuff that I enjoy. So as a seasoned person, if you can stay keeping those three places, I think you're okay.
Yeah. I think you're on the ball there. It's, what keeps you going? And it's not necessarily money, but not giving it away either, as they say. Well, it's been fabulous talking to you, Jon. I love your energy. I can see that you're not an old 71-year-old, and I think that's what appeals to the young people. I mean, I see people who are younger than me that are, the walking dead, and that's not going to appeal to young people. They're not going to listen to them. But if you've got the energy and you've got the insight and the enthusiasm that you have, you can see why they're responding to you. Well, I'm going to continue to enjoy reading your work. So thank you again for talking with me, and I hope you have a nice evening.
Well, it's a pleasure to talk with you, and I'd be happy to make whatever introductions you would find.
Oh, that'd be lovely. I'd really appreciate that because I would like to talk to more people and spread the word. All right. Well, thank you very much and enjoy your evening.
Enjoy your day.
I will. Yes. Bye then.
Thanks again, Nigel.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the Wisepreneurs podcast. Jon Younger has been another incredible guest. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you have a moment and the inspiration, I'd love you to leave a review for me on iTunes. Your feedback not only helps me grow and improve, but it also allows others to discover the show and benefit from the insights shared by our amazing guests. Again, thank you for listening. I'm excited to continue providing you with engaging and informative episodes that will help you level up in your entrepreneurial journey. Once again, thank you for tuning into the Wisepreneurs podcast. Stay tuned, and I'll catch you in the next one.